those that are joining us. And we are going to begin our meeting as a crew circling up. Now that we're back in person, we're getting back to this tradition of opening our board meetings in a way that represents what we do in our schools. So should we get up there, you think? Yeah. Or is that better for our virtual?
You have to limbo, Rob.
Make sure you don't cover the camera behind you, Rob. So, the camera behind you, Lex. Yeah.
So, I'm sort of pinching because Jasmine was going to read tonight, but she's on speakerphone and she has to do a situation. So, I got this email today from where I got it. It's actually perfect for tonight's agenda. Michael Logan, staff member in our school district, has a twin brother who has discovered a passion for running rather late in his life. He's actually running like 16 miles. So he's a very fast runner. And he ran the New York City Marathon this weekend, and Michael went out to watch him. His report on the marathon was, my brother ran really fast for 20 miles and then became dehydrated, nearly blind, and barely able to walk. He staggered to the finish line. I've had that experience, except with a very fast marathon. So anyway, but he actually suggested this because we have two incoming and two outgoing board members. And so he turned me on to this very brief excerpt from the Human Kinetics website, which is a running blog. And it says, incoming and outgoing runners. Incoming runners must work hard to avoid dramatic changes in speed late in their leg. As they approach the zone, they need to stay in their predetermined part of the lane, inside the legs 1 and 3, outside the legs 2 and 4, and aggressively attack the zone. In the non-visual exchange, it is the responsibility of the incoming runner to place the baton in the hands of the outgoing runner. Outgoing runners position themselves in a stance that will allow acceleration and will allow them to see the incoming runner approach. These positions may vary. Some runners may want to get into a modified three-point stance to stimulate the block start. Although this start may be faster, it is not recommended because athletes will have difficulty seeing the goal mark in such a low position. A fundamentally sound stance would have the athlete slightly crouched, feet mostly facing forward, and the upper body slightly twisted in toward the incoming runner. The arms should be set in position to begin the alternate driving runner action, characteristics of acceleration mechanics. I'm not sure I understand all that. You get the point. The only thing that was really confusing is the incoming runner is the runner who's finishing. So that would be the outgoing board member. So you've got to put the language there to test a little bit. But nonetheless, just thinking about that baton handoff and the responsibility for getting the baton. And I kind of thought it would be fun to think about that. I don't know if I want to force you to do this. To just, as an outgoing board member, if you could write something on that baton and hand it to the incoming board member, what would it be? If you, as an incoming board member, who wish for one thing to be handed to the outgoing board member, what would happen? And so, again, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but we are in that context.
So many times we've heard ourselves say, this is the big picture view, and therefore it's like the eagle-eye view. We have the 20,000-foot view. And what I realized is, this isn't just a word, Rob, but I have to go with it. It's not, it's the big picture view. People say, well, how do you dive into the little problem? So I think of it as the eagle. The eagle sees everything under, it can see the curve of the earth. But an eagle can also get to the river so fast and grab that fish. So even though it's a big picture view, it doesn't mean you don't see the small stuff. And that we also do is grabbing the fish and saying, here's an issue, here's the thing. So when you hear big picture, think of the eagle and how it's not just the big view, but it's also that ability to dive fast and dive hard and get to the goal. So, there you go. Eagle.
And I think mine would be make a research. So they look at all questions. Is there much quicker and would you like to have it as a farm?
I think that the instructional manual with like just a few key words like look at it like, you know, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do the other now, do the quarter drive, there's kind of the little thing on there, okay, and now I know what I need to do. So I maybe as a cheat sheet or that.
Robert's rules for dummies.
There you go.
I don't think I know what I need to know yet. I would add that we're so lucky to have had this wonderful board members and still have a team of you. And we're really eager to welcome you two resources on the team. And I feel like we've had really positive relationships with our board members, and we kind of feel like an extension of the team. We hope you feel welcome and be part of our group.
And we jumped right into the reading, and then I skipped over the introduction that we've typically done. If we could just really briefly, because we have some people who are joining us tonight, we need to say our name and our role, which is a community member, it could be parent, it could be board member, whatever that might be, and then we'll get a sense of who we are.
Rupert, board member, parent, lead, leader, the rest.
And Natalie Torres, and board president.
Hannah Cole, and Sam First. Andy Davlin, Chief of
Make a mark on the turn and she's going to drop sign, she's going Good job. Getting tighter, fewer for the top.
Thank you all so much. We need to go ahead and pick up some of these. Right? Oh, wait, hold on 1 second. Jasmine. Oh.
Board member and parent of a middle schooler at our district.
Yay. Thank you, Jasmine. Sorry. I'm like holding the phone, like projecting it, and then I forgot it was in my face. All right. Well, I know I said this earlier, but good evening, everyone. A quorum being present, I call this meeting to order 6:43. We started a little earlier, but the first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Awesome. There being no corrections, the agenda is approved as presented. All right. And thank you to our interpreters, Catalina and Claudia. Thank you so much. Over there, busy at work over there, so thank you so much. And did you want to give a brief introduction?
We're not having simultaneous.
Okay,
So
perfect. I just wasn't
no
sure.
instructions.
You were confused. Yeah. All right.
We're recording, so when we, whatever you call it, share it, stream it.
Don't try.
Don't try. When people see it, they'll be able to listen to it.
Thank you. Yes. Is this good? All right. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel and minutes from the previous board meetings. Are there any corrections to minutes or other items? No? Awesome. There being no corrections, the consent agenda is approved as presented. And we have one public comment signed up for tonight for Kathy Wells. Is she here? Kathy?
Yeah, she's in
Okay. All right. Well, Kathy, if you are out there, you are welcome to email us. We read all emails sent, and it can also be used as public comment. All right. The next business in order is a resolution honoring Jennifer Rupert. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve the resolution honoring Jennifer Rupert.
I second.
Wonderful. All right. Yes. Oh, very gently. Okay. All right. Honoring Jennifer Rupert. Whereas Jen Rupert has served on the Roaring Fork School Board of Education for 6 years, serving as board president for 3 years, dedicating her time and energy to our students, staff, community in countless ways as a passionate, knowledgeable, and solutions-oriented leader. Those who have worked closely with Jen over the years call out her smile, authenticity, wisdom, and heartfelt contributions. Whereas Jen has made a significant positive impact on our schools while always putting students first. In the words of Chief Academic Officer Rick Holt, I use my Rick voice, Jen always seeks input, has valuable insights, and is consistent in making decisions that keep student well-being and success as the primary focus. Former Basalt Middle School principal Jennifer Helferman, thank you, echoed the sentiment, sharing that during a super contentious time, Jen continued to focus on what was best for students. While former board member Matt Hamilton said she never lost sight of the children we educate and the teachers and staff who are most important assets. Whereas Jen has provided steadfast leadership during the pandemic, facing unprecedented challenges, in the words of Superintendent Rob Stein, Jen has been a steady and strong supporter of the school district over some challenging years. She worked tirelessly as a board member and board chair and proved herself to be a cheerful listener and conscientious decision maker. Board President Natalie Torres echoed the sentiment and shared that Jen remained committed to the district's mission and values while keeping our team focused and resilient to the challenges ahead. She has demonstrated grace and strength in her role as board president, and her impact on the district and our team will be long-lasting. Whereas Jen has proved herself to be a careful listener and advocate, in the words of former board member Mary Elizabeth Geiger, Jen's strengths include her patience and overwhelming respect for all ideas and persons working with and coming before the board. She is an excellent leader and incredible listener. According to Director of Student and Family Services, Anna Cole, Jen brings a warm humility and fierce strength to every interaction and is willing to hear opposing viewpoints and consider them. Chief Operating Officer Jeff Gatlin, I can't say her name really, shared that Jen has always brought a valued perspective and it's obvious in how she operates that she has a big heart. Whereas Jen has demonstrated a commitment to excellence and continuous improvement, Anna called out Jen's growth mindset and willingness to listen and learn as inspiring. Elsterman described Jen as a conscientious and thoughtful board member and board president. She put in a great deal of effort to learn and grow so she could provide the best leadership and structure for board meetings and for effective decision making. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that on November 10th, 2021, the Roaring Fork Board of Education publicly affirms our appreciation and gratitude to Jen Rupert. Thank you very much.
Wait.
Thank you, everybody. And as you can imagine, it would be nearly impossible to put all of the wonderful things that were said about you into one resolution. So there are even more statements and accolades from those that you work with, that you know, that you previously served with, current members. And can we do it at the end right now? If any, I'm going to just throw it out there. I'm just going grab it in here. If anyone that had not had a chance to make it into your framed resolution would like to say something, you're welcome to speak now and share just some brief, I don't know, words.
I've learned so much from you. I appreciate how you care so much about the students in our community and some of your insight. And I stay in touch. But I really do not want to working with you.
And I appreciate the leader that you've been, and to all of us, teaching us how to be better board members, and to your ability to listen to others and really make every important inclusive. And I love that the humanity that you bring to the board. You're so heartfelt and thoughtful, and I think that that really has a couple of us. So thank you for this wild ride. We have both been on together for 4 years, and thank you so much. Perfect work. Thanks.
Jasmine, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yes. I'm sorry, man. I could do it. It's really hard to do. But yes, thanks for your leadership. You know, especially as we were coming in, it was really important for us to have access to you, and you never denied us the opportunity to speak with you and ask questions. And that's so appreciated. You know, you were a promotion for president during the first moment of COVID, and you know, I really we didn't appreciate it enough. You were so willing to take the hit for us, and that's something that I'll always be for.
Thank you.
Love you.
And I know I made some comments in the resolution, but I just need to add, I feel like I've known you both forever, and it seems like I also just started yesterday. So I think this is just the forever friendship that I'm grateful to you. And I hope that many more little moments of advice and wisdom are in the future.
Always. Thank you, everybody. So amazing. I count you all as friends. Like I said, this is a team. It's not a board meeting, it's a team. And I'm grateful for kind of part of it.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. I need to open my, hold on. I talked too long and then my screen locked. Okay. All right. Please call for the vote.
Okay. Um, let's see. Ramirez? Okay. Rupert? Aye.
Sure.
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
I'm sorry, Steph. Aye. And we'll keep going. Motion passes. Yes, I did.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right.
Okay, I'm next. I, Jen Rupert, move that the board approve the resolution approving, honoring Jennifer Scherer.
I second. Wonderful. Just the next resolution order is a resolution honoring Jen Scherer. All right. All right, Jennifer. Whereas Jennifer Scherer has served on the Roaring Fork Schools Board of Education for 4 years, dedicating her time and talents to our students, staff, and community in countless ways as a thoughtful, hardworking, and compassionate leader. Whereas Jennifer has devoted herself to improving the Roaring Fork Schools, in the words of Board President Natalie Torres, Jennifer has continuously brought thoughtful questions to meetings and a critical examination of policies and procedures to help guide us forward and stay focused on strategic initiatives and enhancing our school district. Superintendent Rob Stein echoed this sentiment. When Jennifer asks a tough question, she does it with compassion and helps to guide us towards improvement. With Jen, it's never about her or her agenda. It's about making a better organization, helping our schools to improve, and improving the quality of programming for our students and families. Whereas Jennifer has demonstrated her work ethic and a willingness to lean into difficult situations. Chief of Student and Family Services, Anna Cole, noted Jennifer's willingness to roll up her sleeves and do the work. Chief Academic Officer Rick Holt shared that Jennifer begins all of her work from the perspective of a student and family advocate. She leans in when situations get difficult and seeks clarity when it is needed to ensure that the very best options are considered. Whereas Jennifer proved herself to be a thoughtful listener and advocate, former board member Matt Hamilton shared that Jennifer leads with thoughtful, deliberate consideration of all aspects of an issue and comes to every board meeting driven by a desire to deliver to all children. The Salt Middle School principal, Jen Olferman, shared that there is never a doubt that Jennifer has the best interests of all stakeholders in mind, as she listens to opposing viewpoints and shares her thoughts on decisions. She asks good questions and looks for compromises. Whereas Jennifer leads others towards clarity and improvement. Anna shared that Jennifer brings a refreshing willingness to ask questions that help everyone reach clarity and understanding. Her practical, grounded, and optimistic approach to leadership and decision-making helps us stay connected and focused. Chief Operating Officer Jeff Gatlin appreciated Jennifer's ability to ask solid, challenging questions and feel like her inquiries into many topics lead to a better understanding of discovery. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that on November 10th, 2021, the Roaring Fork Schools Board of Education publicly affirms our appreciation and gratitude to Jennifer Scherer. Thank you. All right, photo. Oh yeah, does everybody actually forget I have the pen? I'm like, I said, for those out there, I did try eating earlier with my mask on. And as I mentioned earlier, there are so much more, and so many more that would wanted to say something that didn't even make it on one single sheet of paper. This could have been a book for both of you. So now would be that opportunity for those to share.
I just want to echo what everybody said, that I really, really appreciate your calm demeanor, your way of looking at things. I love how you always are like, well, this is the way it was in the school today, when you just bringing that perspective that I don't have, and I just appreciated that so much. And when you did step into the meeting, you were just thoughtful and good at understanding.
I missed the deadline. But I feel, I feel like a little bit like there's an yin and yang, a polarity. Like, so maybe I'm thoughtful and listening. I listen, you guys, like you do these amazing deep dives into all of the content that will come across our agenda, and you grasp everything you could about what each topic was going to hold, and you took the time for every meeting, rather than any board member I've ever seen, to really just dive into each agenda item and do the research you needed, and ask the questions, or we have some conversations. And it always called me to a higher level, because I see how dedicated you were, and you took on a role of such integrity, that was this is the role. I can't compromise this. This is my work ethic. And I was just so appreciative of that, because I knew that you did that work, so I knew there'd be good questions at our meetings, and also you caused me to go a little deeper than I might have on my own, and then opened up some good conversations. So I just was always grateful for that clarity that we had as the vice president and especially the COVID.
Jasmine, do you want to go?
And thank you. Yeah, thanks for being willing to be that board member who takes extra time volunteering in the classroom, and also, for showing and modeling what asking questions was for all of us. And I really appreciate that you were willing to ask tough questions and ask questions so that all of us have the answers we needed. So thank you for your leadership.
So pieces of what we said made it into this resolution, and I have to say, I just need to add as well, part of what I wrote was my very first board meeting, and I don't even think you realized what this meant at the time, but we're sitting there, right, deer in headlights, like, oh my gosh, am I supposed to ask a question? Does it need to be a good question? What if it's a good question? Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And then you just really just calmly and just so genuinely looked over and whispered, you're doing great. And I was like, okay, that's fantastic. So it was like this moment where I knew I was amongst some really fabulous people, which I knew before that, but that moment was like, thank you. So thank you so much for that. And you've continued, both of you really have continued to show that support, that encouragement, and just that willingness to be the person who lets you know you're doing good. And sometimes that's all that we needed, we don't need to solve the world's problems tonight, but if we get through this, that we've done something to the best of our ability. It's weird because I actually remember that like it was yesterday. And then you said something like, don't worry, I didn't ask questions for like 6 months or a year or something. I was like, okay, all right, that's all. So, thank you. All right, please call for the vote.
Ramirez?
Aye.
Rupert?
Aye.
Sheriff?
Steph?
Aye. Torres?
Aye.
Motion passes.
It's official. You guys are all.
We're out of here.
Oh, wait, hold on.
We're going.
That's right. Not done yet. All right. The next business in order is a resolution approving the lease financing and installation of the DHS scoreboard.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. So I've got with me tonight Jason Santos, who's our athletic director at the Salt High School. This is really his project. He has a vision for athletics at DHS, new scoreboard enhancements that provide. If you want to sit up here, I think just they're more a part of the conversation. So Jason and I work together. I was mostly working the legal and financing side of this. And basically what it is, it's a scoreboard. The total cost for the men was $256,000, paid for by sponsorship money, which Jason's lined up, I think it's something like 90% of the funds already. So pay for itself, and beyond that, that's money then that each year would go into the pocket of the DHS athletic program. So big strategic thinking, long-term planning, but we need board approval to enter into those to get this taken care of. So I open it up for questions beyond, about the project itself that Jason can answer, or anything around the financing.
Yes, and we are going to set a motion before we get into that with, is there a motion?
I move that the board, I move that the board approve the resolution approving the lease financing and installation of the VHS scoreboard.
I'll second. All right. Now, is there any discussion? Official start of that.
Okay, I know a lot about this, so I would love for you guys to work.
Should we start off with Jason, just explain a little bit about what the scoreboard, because it's really, I think, two boards, what the vision is like around,
That would be great.
what they can provide.
So what it will be is it's two scoreboards. So if you've been up to any of our facilities in the district where there's a scoreboard, that current scoreboard will stay in place. What we're going to do that's different at the SALT is we're going to install a video scoreboard. And so the video scoreboard will be in the opposite end zone of where the current scoreboard is. It's a huge thing for Basalt in multiple ways. But one way I like to look at it is the company that we are partnering with provides us with educational support to train our students how to actually run the scoreboard, to give them the video production aspect. And so that is a big reason that we decided to go with them. So what this will allow us to do is to stream out games on the scoreboard. It will allow us to bring sponsorship in there where we can air actual commercials from sponsors that we currently have. So if they have one produced or our students produce one, we can air that. We can also work with our schools within our community to highlight students in there and also do student of the weeks, health checks, all of that within the video scoreboard. Our plan is to use it around 30 times a year. For football, we will move soccer down there as well. And then if we have Powder Puff games, but we also want to open it up to the community. And we've already discussed the idea of doing kind of picnics on a football field where we would be able to air movies so that our community can come and enjoy the night under the stars while watching a movie on the football field. So that's kind of our huge approach to it. Like Nathan said, we've secured 8 sponsors thus far in our first really 6 months of going around and getting this. The rest we will go through after board approval, and we will get the rest of the sponsorship lined up for the remainder of the term of the lease.
And so would that just contribute with as far as like ongoing maintenance and that kind of, it's not really looking at being a revenue builder, but rather a way to be self-sustaining?
Yeah, so it's actually going to be a revenue builder after year 5. So in talking to the company, the half-life that they put on a video board like this is half-life of 10 years, and that's if we're maximizing the hours per year, which we will not be able to maximize the hours per year at this point in our projections. So we're looking at a board that's going to last 15 to 20 years. So what happens is after year 5 of the contract, those contracts go up for renewal to our sponsors. And if they would like to renew, they're going to renew at the same cost that they renewed the initial time. Which means that all of that money that they're giving to the athletic department to fund the scoreboard is going to come back into the athletic department in year 6 through 10, 11 through 15. And until we realize we need to replace the board, we will continue working with those sponsors, and we will continue trying to find new sponsors to help us get even more money into the athletic department.
Oh, I see. So this would also be an opportunity for funding an athletic department in
Yep.
addition.
Yep.
So
After the first
5 years, the board will be paid off, and then any dollars that are generated from advertising will go directly to the athletic department to support
as well as I'm imagining some portion to just repairs.
Yes, yes.
But it says in the memo that, with the sponsorship to cover the cost of $256,000, but we're not quite there yet. Do we have and it says expected fee.
Right.
Is there a plan to use it? Like, do we have to, with the lease agreement, do we have to, like, purchase that front and pay it off, or is it use it?
It's an installment plan. I think I included a payment schedule on one of those pages. It'll
Yeah.
show like the principal 56 plus the applied interest rate is 3.7%. There's a fixed payment you make every year for 5 years. You make it.
And so, do we have money in our budget to cover up the gap between the sponsorship and what the repayment is?
If worse came to worse, you would have to find the money, and I'm confident you could find that.
And you know, it's probably $1,000.
I also at this point don't see, to take it off the basis point, I don't see the potential of us being short at this point because we've just done it in such a short period of time to be able to
And we already
get,
close.
to get to our 8 sponsors. We just have not launched in, because of the way the scoreboard lays out, we're only allowed so many sponsors to be on the actual board. So we wanted to fill those first. Once we filled those, we decided our next course of action on basically 3 of finding sponsors. And that is more of a game sponsorship, in-game activity, whatever they might do. If they want to hand out towels at the gate or anything like that, we would sell that sponsorship opportunity too.
Just out of curiosity, how does this just compare to what other high school stadiums have? Is this something that perhaps could be like a pilot almost, where we see the effectiveness, or is this like
Big cows versus longhorns.
let's see it.
Wow.
To answer that,
Anyway,
currently Mullen High School, Front Range, is one of the schools that has this scoreboard. We would be the only school on the western slope of Colorado to have a scoreboard like this. So we would be the first to be piloting a program like this. I've worked with the company for the past 8 months, really, on this project. We've worked with them on a business plan on how to secure sponsorship. They've also worked with us on the graphics that we're going to be able to produce and how to do that. So we've really worked hand in hand. The nice part is they have engineers within the Denver area. The company that we're working with, they have people within Colorado Springs area. So they're up here and they're on call with us frequently. And so we decided when we began this process to look for a company that was going to support what our mission was and what our goal was. And it wasn't just to make finances for the district or to fund the athletic department, but also to provide educational opportunities. And so they weren't just handing it over and saying, like, figure it out. They actually are going to work with us hand in hand. And it's the same company that is at Invesco Field or at Ball Arena. And so they would be able to put us in contact with those groups to actually run those scoreboards to help train our students and show them what we can do with our scoreboards.
I mean, great work organizing, and I'm just so grateful for the result, for the few people in our community that really contributed to this. I don't know if it's a full page of help and all that now, but,
I was going to do it.
oh, good. Because, like, you know, this is above and beyond. You know, another thing, I love the idea of having an additional elective for our kids to turn into a class. Sports medicine is really taking off. Have this as another elective. And finally, I've seen, without the scoreboard, I've seen kids do movie nights, you know, during homecoming. And ever since we did the bond issue and remodeling that center space, the commons area where the kids can sit together and sit steps down, I've never seen kids so happy to go stay on school grounds. So, you know, I mean, all teenagers want to run off, but really, movie night, they have the whole school there for movie night. So I just think it's also not only an opportunity to invite the whole community, but anytime you get employees who want to stay
stay at school, and I've seen that happen at the school. So just saying, I very much support it and all the different opportunities. So thanks for putting that in.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be able to do it without our community support, without a doubt. I mean, I've been working with Becky Dabrowski for the past 8 months on securing sponsorship, and she's really been gung ho on this idea. And I remember when I pitched it to her the first time, she didn't question it at all. She's like, "This seems like a good idea." I was like, "You can say no. Like, it's not right to say no." And she's like, "No, this is a great use of our resources in a way to really bring in the community and to really exhibit how great of a community Basalt actually is." And I think the board will do that.
Great. Any other questions? All right, if not, then we are ready to call for the vote. Ramirez? Are you there, Justin?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Rupert? Aye. Sheriff? Abstain. Seth? Aye. Horace? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Woohoo! Wonderful job.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. The next business in order is a resolution of acceptance of GCF MLB grant in terms towards the GSHS theater stage lighting project.
Yes, again, sorry, go ahead.
Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve the resolution of acceptance of the GCF MLD grant terms for the GSHS theater stage lighting project.
Wonderful. And is there any discussion? Nathan?
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. So this is a follow-up to a resolution we brought in, I think it was September, to approve an application to the Garfield County Federal Mineral Lease District to upgrade the lighting at the Glen Springs High School auditorium. The application is sent in, the project is approved, the funds are there. So this is basically, I view it as a formality to accept the funds on behalf of the district for the project.
Yeah, that's what it's easy, yes,
Yeah.
it's easy.
And that does funds cover the whole project?
They will cover what she wrote, what Kate McRae from Glen Springs High wrote into the grant.
Wonderful. All right. Okay, since this one was really just a follow-up, closing the loop, we're good to call for the vote. Ramirez?
Aye.
Rupert? Aye. Sheriff? Aye. Seth?
Aye.
Horace? Aye. Motion passes. Wonderful. All right. The next business in order is a presentation about the mill levy override salary adjustment plan and recommendation for staff bonus to provide short-term relief. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve staff bonuses to provide short-term relief.
Second. And is there any discussion?
Yeah, let me, there are two parts to this presentation. I actually want to walk the board through our thinking and actions moving forward. You know, of course, we're in this position where we get to celebrate very strong support from our community and our voters, and so the mill levy override is approved. And so now we have the opportunity to start determining how to use these funds for staff, faculty and staff retention and recruitment efforts, largely through pushing them into salaries. I would just want to walk the board through the process, and thought the best way to do that would be to give you a similar presentation to the one that I'm going to be giving with each employee group between now and the end of December. I've already met with 2 groups. I'm meeting with another group tomorrow, and we made a few corrections. I think it's still a work in process. But what we want to do with each employee group is just to give them an update on the process and also get their input, because we really want this to be collaborative. We want this to be transparent. We want all of our staff and our community to know how we're using these funds and to consult them as we make those decisions. you as a board will have a chance to approve it later, but I also wanted to, just advise you on the process we're using to get into it. Of course, the community did give us this opportunity, and so now the question is, how do we allocate the funding? Just as a reminder, most of our funding comes in the form of what's called total program funding, and that's per pupil funding allocated by the state of Colorado based on a formula, the state funding formula. There's sort of a base fund in there, and then there are 4 other factors, risk factors or cost factors that would then add on to our base. And then all that per pupil is multiplied times our student enrollment, and that's how we get our K-12 funding. So for our school district, our funding is about $63 million. That number won't even be finalized until December, I think, and so that's one of the things, sort of a moving target, but we have a fairly good estimate. In addition to state funding, not on this slide, there's some additional funding from the federal government and from grants like you just approved funding for, 2 different kinds of grants. That's not in our general fund though. So this is just sort of the bread and butter, what pays for our students' education. On top of the total program fund, we can go to our local voters and ask them to approve a mill levy override, a tax, a real estate tax from local communities up to about 25% above the total program fund. Based on past elections, we're already receiving about $8.8 million. So what the voters just approved in the last election last week was another maximum $7.7 million. So that's how much additional money you'll see coming into the school district. As you can see, that's nearly 10% of our budget. So it's a significant increase in our funding, all of which is meant to be used for teacher and staff salaries and other retention and recruitment efforts. So if you look at that pie, that $7.7 million, you have to set aside about 12% for uses that are non-recurring. And that means we can't put them directly into salaries because salaries have to be recurring funds. You can't just pay people and then suddenly cut back after a certain time in the future. And about 13% is a state mandated pass-through to charter school. So the remaining 75% gives us almost $6 million to distribute just in increased staff and teacher pay. And so that's what we're starting to talk to our employee groups now is how do we allocate those funds. So we've established 3 goals. The first goal is when the pandemic began in 2020 and the budget kind of crashed and our budget was cut, we had to freeze, or we didn't give a pay increase or a step increase to any of our employees last school year. So people have sort of lost a year of gains. So the first priority is to restore that lost step for all employees who have been here since 2020. Or since the spring of 2020. And so that will be our first goal with these monies. Second is the goal that got us started on this when the interest-based bargaining group came to the board and asked you to approve this in 2018, 2019, I think, was to have more competitive salaries, defined as bringing us into the top third among our competitors. For teachers, we have very clearly defined competition. It's about 10 school districts, ourselves included, that have some similarities. They're mostly mountain, rural, resort, and aggregated, they sort of give us a place to benchmark, and be competitive. So for the teachers, it's really getting to the top third of teacher salaries against those groups. For our other employees, it's a little more complicated because there's not just a school district market, there's a local market. If you're a bus driver, a food service worker, a custodial worker, you're not likely looking at other school districts for employment, you're looking locally. So we need to think about top third locally, and we need to define the market for each of our employee groups. And then thirdly is really equity. And that, is striving to actually provide employees a living wage and just cleaning up some of the inconsistencies or discrepancies that have evolved into our pay schedule over time. And it's very hard to correct a pay schedule without new money because it means you have to take away in order to give. And so while there's an infusion, we think we can increase the lowest paid employees more, and we can also just bring up some of those discrepancies so that when you look across employee groups, for example, we don't have an employee looking at applying for a job at another department because it's a department that would pay the more competitive wage. So we want to really iron out those inconsistencies. So then we started thinking about, well, how are we going to get this done? And these are sort of technical things, but the first is just, it's not so easy to define our market. It's easy for teachers because teachers are pretty much, there's only 178 school districts and there's only a handful of school districts that are similar enough for us that most of our teachers would be looking at jobs there versus here. But for other employee groups, it gets more challenging. And so one thing is to really look at those local markets in collaboration with our employees to see if you weren't working here, where else would you be working? We really want to be transparent so our employees understand, where their salaries come from and why they're paid what they're paid. We want to involve our employees in the decision-making process instead of just sort of sharpening our pencils and saying, here you go. So that's why we're going to be meeting with them a couple times through this process. As I've said, we want to make a simpler pay structure that removes so many different pay scales and employee groups and tries to reduce it if possible. And then we really want to work with our employees. We want to be collaborative. We believe that every employee group, except for senior district leadership who are excluded from the mill levy override, so that's pretty much everybody except for one on this end of the table, plus a few who aren't here. Every employee group will see a pay raise. That doesn't mean every employee will. We're going to infuse money into those groups. There may be some people at the very top whose salaries don't grow. We just don't know yet because we have to work with each group to say what are our priorities for distributing this all in this group. I was a little surprised when I learned of our timeline because I was thinking we'll get, if the mill levy passes, we'll start to get this money and we can immediately push it into paychecks. What I didn't quite understand, I'm going to actually just turn to Nathan, is the first couple issues are, as I've explained, it takes us some time to conduct some salary research, but then we're not going to actually know and have the available funds ready to distribute for quite some time. Maybe you could walk us through that part.
Yeah, so a couple slides back, Rob had showed the slide that what our total MLO, it's a percentage of our total program funding from the state. We won't know our final total program funding until we have final student counts. The final review was due today, so that's still a work in progress. We even know what that 25% number is. So right now we're using 7.7 of the max we said we know. It could very well be a little bit less than that depending on our student count. We won't know that. That'll come out around December 1st. We're waiting for the election to be certified, the results true. And then at the last board meeting in December, I'll bring you what we're actually going to mill for next year, which will have the exact amount of the new mill of the rest. We don't even know the exact amount we're working with until middle of December. And we need final property values, which again come out in early December. So we're still waiting on this information to roll in. We can do some precise calculations around what amounts we have to work with. In the meantime, we're painting with broad brushstrokes using that 7.7 million. We'll have to massage that when we have actual. Still waiting on a bunch of things.
So we've pretty much completed our research on salary comparisons. We actually did a study last April, but you can all see the economy is really volatile, and so we weren't sure that the labor market was the same last April as it is now. And so we just commissioned another study, and I think Angie's gotten those results back. So we have a pretty good idea of other school districts and some local comparisons. We also want to actually go to some of the local employers after we hear from our employees who they think our competition is and try to find out more about actual details of our local market. And that information will be hard to gather, but then we want to meet with each employee group and consult them at least twice, once now, where would you be working if you weren't working here, and also what other, compensation aside from salary might be meaningful to you, and should we be looking at some other things in addition to salary. And then we want to go back to them in January and say, this is our plan. Now give us feedback before we execute. People will not see money in their paychecks likely until April. That's the bad news. The good news is that first paycheck, when they get it with mill levy dollars, will be retroactive to the beginning of the year. So they will get a pay raise effective August. They just won't get the money until April. And that's really important for people to understand. They're going to see a full year's pay increase. They just won't receive any money. So that's why we're recommending to the board that we give employees a bonus before Christmas, because they've been hanging on by the fingernails. Most of our employees are still a year behind where they should be because of the pay freezes. And so we feel it's warranted to give them a one-time $1,000 bonus out of an insurance refund that we got and some Proposition ED monies, which are one-time monies for K-12 that we'll get this year. We'll get Proposition ED monies for K-12 next year as well. So we can talk more about that part in a minute, but that's really our reasoning, is because of this timeline. The other thing is we're struggling now with recruitment, so bus drivers, guest teachers, food service, all of our hourly or classified employee groups, we're shorthanded. So we want something now as an incentive. We can't very well hire somebody and say, well, you'll see a pay increase in April. So we're recommending that any new hires get a $500 bonus between now and April to carry us over. And we think that will be a meaningful incentive in a very tight marketplace.
I would also like to add, this will likely max out our local mill levies for some time. So this is our last kind of chance to be this thoughtful, to be hasty and to just say we're going to plow out in December. You really risk not solving the list of, you don't resolve the inequities, you don't fix some of the structural things that have just cropped up over time. We're a long-time employer, and these things kind of over time work their way in your pay schedule. So I think it's to our benefit long-term to be really thoughtful about how
Go back and make one point. We have a collaborative bargaining process with our teachers and our certified employees called interest-based bargaining. It's been in effect for more than 20 years, and that's how we determine, once we know what our state funding is going to be, how we infuse more money into the schedule for our certified employees. That process works really well, and it typically starts in November and goes through March or so, and then we bring, in a good year, the last couple of years have been really irregular. In a typical year, we bring to the board by March recommendations for salary increases for our certified employees. We don't have this clear process for our classified employees. And what's been really interesting in a couple of meetings so far, actually, is that people don't understand their paychecks. And they don't understand the factors that go into determining their pay. And so I'm really finding this a valuable opportunity already to meet with folks in here, and give them an opportunity to speak up. Like, if you weren't working for us, well, be working. What else would be meaningful to you besides, just salary? But I think it's important for them and the board to understand that as a school district, we have some disadvantages and we have some advantages. The disadvantage from a retire right now standpoint is that a disproportionate amount of our dollars go to benefits, not to take home pay. So by state law, our employees have to participate in the PARA, the state retirement system, which is a huge contribution on the part of the district. It's over 20% of every dollar that we give the employee, we have to contribute 20% more to PARA. And then we provide full medical health insurance for each full-time employee. And typically when you're going and working in a fast food restaurant or I don't want to name any employers by name, but many of the employers that hire similar kinds of jobs, they don't provide health. And so those are things that are benefits, but they make it, they make your actual hourly salary less. On the other side, we have some huge advantages. One is we don't pay for capital like other employers do. Typically, a business pays rent or mortgage, right? And we don't, because our buildings are bond funded. We have to pay to maintain them. We don't have to make capital investments. And so when I think, for example, with a preschool, we happen to have somebody here who owns a preschool, and I'm assuming that they have to pay lease, or they own their preschool building and have to pay it off out of their operating dollars. We don't have to do that. So that's an advantage, and so those dollars get to go to salaries. And the other big advantage is that we just have economy. We have efficiencies when we operate at scale. And so there are very few employers who benefit from our economies and our efficiencies. And so that too allows us to put more dollars into paychecks. This is an illustration that Angie came up with. But what it does is just put dollars and cents to what I was just saying. So if you take a low-paid $15 per hour employee on a 185-day year, which is pretty much, our school year, they would be earning $22,000. However, all in, they're really earning $36,000. If you look at a 260 more than a year-round calendar, they would be earning $31,000, but all in $47,000. And so there's a lot of additional benefits that people either receive as benefits or don't, depending on the individual. that we're spending. And so one of the things that Angie really wants to do, and I'm going to stop speaking for Angie and turn it over to her, is have our employees better understand the total compensation package. But it's either an advantage or a disadvantage in terms of our efficiencies or our ability to recruit and retain, depending on who's out there. I'm going to move to the next slide and hand off to you.
Okay, we've really been trying to talk to employees about how and why they're earning what they're earning. And over the past few months in this role, I've realized that a lot of people really don't have a great understanding of how their starting wages were determined and how those wages might compare. And while we've always had the transparency of having those starting wages up on our website, and if you're a certified position like a teacher, your entire scale, kind of through the history of your lifetime with the district, is up there for everyone to see. I don't get the sense that our staff, and especially non-certified staff, know how to use it like that. So we're trying to work on transparency right now. And one way that we're doing this is just explaining to everyone how the wages were set in these meetings. So when we get in these meetings, we say, the starting ranges for all of these classified positions in the district currently range from $13.90 to $22.60 per hour. And you can be placed at a higher starting step based on your years of experience that you bring into the table and have to apply directly to that particular role. So if you're a cook, we can count experience as a waiter or a bartender or a caterer, but we wouldn't count experience as a nanny. If you're an early childhood employee, you probably would count that experience as a nanny, and you wouldn't count experience as a bartender. Unlike our certified positions, salary advancement for our classified staff is not tied to education. That's both a benefit and a detriment. We don't have to have a certain level of education to advance to some steps, but also we have to help them earn more money. This has been tough for some, early childhood educators, for example, come in with a lot of certifications and a lot of training that they have to do. Our bus drivers spend a ton of hours getting their CDS, and that education doesn't help advance them. So that's something we might want to consider. And then in terms of once you're hired, how you can make more money, we explain that as long as the budget allows, all employees advance one step each year, and that's happened, it's my 6th year with the district, that's happened every single year, with the exception of that one COVID year in my district lifetime. And every step, every year is equivalent to a 1.8% annual raise. On top of that, we go in every 2 years or so, and we adjust the dollar amount of the steps by doing market comparisons with some years, so there's the 1.8%, and then an additional raise if you feel like the market rate, we were lagging behind market rate. Additionally, after 5 years, classified staff who are not supervisors earn a longevity incentive of 55 cents an hour every hour for every 5-year increment of service. Any questions on that?
Let me just finish, and then I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, a lot of discussion. So, I guess one point I'd like to make is I reviewed some of the universal benefits that we pretty much provide, but also require all of our employees, like retirement, healthcare, health insurance, life insurance. Then there's some opt-in benefits, and we're already hearing from employees that some of those are super meaningful, and they're asking about others. The big one is housing. We have a pretty significant housing program. There's a huge benefit to some employees. We know there's more people who would like to participate. It's a strategic initiative this year to try to expand housing, affordable housing to more employees. It's probably the biggest difference maker in compensation than having a living wage in this valley. Another is child care. And so we're also exploring as part of this, especially early childhood fee structure, because we know we hear from employees that child care is another very hard, to afford to work in this valley if you don't have affordable child care. And then there's things like, the employee discounts, like for the ski areas and the hot springs and the rec centers. Some people participate in those. But we want to make sure that, we're providing all these things that we drop of our university usage. So anyway, I think that's, oh yeah, then this was right from our website. I was like, oh my God, that's a lot of information. And she said, well, I just took a screenshot. You want to add anything?
You're like, I don't know if we should share that. No, I mean, as Rob mentioned, there's a lot of diversity in these starting stages, and I'm not yet sure if that diversity of pay is warranted. So it seems like we want to try to have fewer differences between positions that maybe aren't meaningfully different.
Okay. Okay, so anyway, I already went over this, but so we're meeting with each group. We're going to put them in table groups. We're going to ask them to talk about, who do you perceive as your who are we competing against for your position? What other benefits, what benefits you find valuable, and what other benefits should we be exploring? We're learning a lot. We hope to learn a lot, and as we get more clarity on the exact funding, we'll be able to use that then to use this money to pay schedules in equitably and to be more competitive. So I said my piece again. You need to take action. I hope on the bonus before we complete this part of the agenda. So any questions or comments?
I think what came out of our discussions for me is really being able to highlight the economic benefit of working at our district. Rob pointed out that $15 an hour for someone on a 185-day schedule. The value of that insurance is another $6.50 an hour. Just alone. I mean, right there, just highlighting that, like, if we weren't paying you that, we'd paying you more, but then you can go source your own health insurance, it's likely more expensive. But highlighting, I mean, that's a huge benefit for it. It's something we're committed to as a district is providing.
I did have a quick question about the slide that demonstrates the 1.8% increase. Is that 1.8% increase take into account, how the premiums for health insurance may go up, and for example, if the premiums go up by 5%, but your raise was 3%, it actually looks like you made less. Is that 1.8% after accounting for that, or is that like if premiums went up by 5%, your raise was 6.8, and so the felt
Historically, we've covered the cost of both there's 3 health insurance plans. The district covers the full cost of the less expensive plan for the employee. So if it goes up, we pay more. But if that goes up and the family plan goes up, so the 1.8% isn't necessarily adjusted to match health insurance in any way.
You're right. It's that 1.8% is independent of any increase in cost.
But when we have a big health insurance increase, that's less money we have to put in salaries. So we take the health insurance out first, and then the remainder is what we have for salaries. And by the way, I've heard from some employees already that even a significant pay raise is not going to help them enough because of the cost of insuring the hospital. So that is another hardship. That we have one of the highest cost insurance markets in the country, in this part of the state. So it's another big burden for our employees. We're not alone, but because we provide health insurance, it's a bigger cost for us.
one other question while maybe others are pondering this. You mentioned the collaborative feedback from the teachers and stakeholders about what they would like to see with this salary increase. We've heard from also community members that it's more than just about the money, it's also other contributing factors. Will that be asked? Will the culture of their school contribute to their, wanting to stay as a teacher? Maybe some other aspects that they can contribute to that feedback. And I'm just, obviously spitballing here that if they say, I would love to have a movie maker or whatever, then that would be like something that you would use that like 12%.
The whole spirit of interest-based bargaining is that you work together instead of positionally, like you work together to identify common interests. And, the common interest we're working around here is providing a living wage for our staff. And so that's just one interest. But every time when we meet, and that's the beauty of the certified interest-based bargaining process, is it's a cyclical process by which we don't just look at money and compensation and budget. We also look at working conditions, and we look at things like policies that might, make it a better or worse place to work. And how do we amend those? And so what we started doing 2 years ago is having a parallel process for our classified employees that's like interest-based bargaining, where we meet with them and find out what are the conditions that are working well for you, what are the conditions you'd like to improve upon. And I call it collaborative decision making because it's really sort of problem finding and problem solving collaborative. And that's where those things come up. And we don't have like whatever you said, a juice machine or a coffee machine. But like we've heard things like, as a mechanic, I go through like wardrobe like mad because these chemicals that I work with shred my clothes, and so it would really be beneficial if the district would provide some work clothes, specific to my work, things like that. And we're like, okay. I mean, again, that's money out of the general fund, but then we have less money to distribute to salaries, but it's meaningful to them. And so we're able to work with people with examples like that. Some of it is just working conditions. Like, we have this department that, was it the grounds department? I don't want to get too in the weeds, but the grounds department and the athletics department weren't communicating. And so the grounds people would be frustrated because the athletics department would come up and have a practice on a day scheduled for mowing the grass. Or vice versa, they'd be mowing during, when they were supposed to have warm up for a big game. And so we worked out a better communications vehicle between athletics and grounds so that they didn't have that conflict, because it was enormously frustrating for both of them. And we couldn't, talk about a common interest. I mean, the grounds department exists to provide good facilities on which we can do our programs. And so we just needed to work it through. But without working with our employees, we never would have resolved it.
Awesome. I don't know if it's just something fixes for us. Almost every time, I'm shocked at how often I'll walk into a place and someone will know me and they'll say, oh, she works for the school district so she gets the teacher discount. I'm like, no, I don't actually work for the school district, But I started to pay attention and I didn't know if Angie, if that's like a formalized, like, do we even know the depth of our every restaurant, pizza place, gym in our valley that does this on their own? They offer teachers a discount? Because I was shocked that I get, Jimbo's wants to give me a discount, and Tech Fitness will give you a discount, and Rocky Mountain Martial Arts. But I wonder if that would be meaningful to our staff, if somehow we could do a community reach out and see who is giving discounts so that the teachers know, oh, I'm going to pick this pizza place.
I wasn't there when IDB.
Yeah, do you want to speak to that? Last year, actually, that was a finding of the interest-based bargaining process. Is teachers would their concept was more like a discount card, kind of like one of our high school's athletic programs has, not this one, the one with the smaller horns. And they would like to see something like that. And, I think that's sort of languishing, looking for ownership, but it's something that would be meaningful. I think not just financially, but it's kind of a nice show of appreciation. So I would say it's a project waiting for ownership.
Yeah, I just had to call that out, like, it already exists, people are doing it on their own. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no harm in that,
Yeah,
having a little word on the street.
Yeah, exactly.
But the big ones are the big ones, like the CDRs and stuff, and those are the ones that
And they're trying to expand our list of partnership. I just really got into what I asked them, like, made really visible. But yeah, working on it slowly, but in terms of a comprehensive card, not like so much.
Well, thank you so much for putting this together. We look forward to hearing more about, that feedback that you're going to collect, and I think we can all agree on the voters demonstrated tremendous support for this measure for salary increases and the appreciation for teachers. So I think we are ready to call for the vote. Ramirez?
Aye.
Rupert? Aye. Shara? Aye. Yep.
Aye.
Morris? Aye. Motion passes.
Madam Chair, I want to say this aloud in case I didn't. This will go in the December, not November paycheck. Not for any of you, but I think for anybody who might.
Yes.
Your word of this decision.
Good clarifying point. Wonderful. All right. Well, the next business in order is a presentation on quarterly financials. We'll pass that over to Nathan.
All right. So first takes action, we have to present quarterly our financial position. So I'm presenting the first quarter of the current fiscal year, the 2021 financial fiscal year, so July through September. I've included only the general fund here, being only 3 months into the year, and basically 1 month into the school year. The general fund's really the only thing that's super meaningful. Not a whole lot going on here. And when you look at the when you look at revenue, a lot of our revenue comes from local property taxes. 97% of that is collected between January and August. So we're in really low collection months right now. So, whether or not that's up or down, it's not super meaningful. If we get to March and we're down, then we'll have to have some discussion. Go for that. One thing that did stand out there that was specific ownership taxes was last year was a record year, and this year's already exceeding that. So that plays well for us. That could be a one-time thing. Specific ownership taxes. So we'll keep our eye on that. If that keeps trending positively. Other than that, on the revenue side, I think things look fairly normal at this point. Some of the one-time funding we get from the state, or not one-time funding, but early childhood education or ECEA, so SPED funding. We got that early last year. We haven't received that yet, so that's a difference. We received Prop E money so far this year, but we got it later last year. So there's just some matching timing year over year that may look odd when you go line by line, but on the whole, nothing stands out on the revenue side. And then on the expenses side, we are seeing a slight decrease in salaries and benefits, and that's we've got 60 open positions, 50 open positions, and we're just not spending money on positions we don't have. Other than that, everything looks fairly normal for the first quarter of the year. I'd open it up for any discussions or line item questions if I can answer those.
I have another question in what you just said about in these unfilled positions. Are we just holding on to that money, hoping to fill those positions? And then once those are unfilled, we'll determine what to do with.
Yeah, so let's say those stayed open for the whole year, that money would roll back into the general fund as an increasing reserves year over year. And that is typically how we built our reserve balances through unfilled positions. We can't take that money and redistribute it and say, here, we get everybody a raise because we want to fill those positions. If we distribute that money as raises, we basically eliminated those positions. So that's something to try.
I will say this is a unique year in my experience in schools where we have more money than people, not by our choice. And so we're trying to be creative with some of those savings from unfilled positions to use them now. We're not seeing this as an opportunity to save for reserve students. Oh my God, we have this money. Can we do something now to get this work done in some other way? So we're trying to be creative, and that's a resource that we have. But as Nathan said, it's very rare. I mean, it's the money. It's generally savings that we have.
So a concrete example that Rob said, we were at one point, I think, 9 or 10 custodian shows. We actually outsourced some custodial services using those unfilled position dollars that have accrued and will continue to build up to pay for that service. So it's just that's a line item swap, essentially. We're paying for service rather than paying for something.
Okay, that's great. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So we're offering bonuses to employees who recommend someone for an open position. That person gets hired. We've been using some of those dollars to incentivize people to recommend our place of work as their place.
Natalie, can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jasmine.
Nathan, on the COVID money, do we have any left over? I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well, so I know you already answered that.
Are you talking about our federal COVID funds?
Yeah, ESSER funds, any of the money you're given from ESSER?
I mean, so we're still in the process.
Repeat the
Oh, yeah.
question.
So the question is, do we have any leftover ESSER funds? The answer is we're still in the process of spending that. So the ESSER one funds, we evaluated our first year. I think we had $70,000 we need to reallocate that are currently in spoken for. But the other two big funds, ESSER two and ESSER three, we presented on those again, I think back in early September. Like that is still the plan to spend those in that manner. So, and we'll have to readjust those every year as we spend over the reimbursement.
You'll give us an update when, where we're at with that.
Yeah, I can do that.
Then for the operations, it is on the actual expenditures.
Yep.
I feel, looking at it, on the operations maintenance section, there is a section at the bottom that says capital outlay. It looks like last year, or this year, actually last year, yeah, this year, we set aside 23. Well, I guess I'm a little confused why it grew so much. It's just more, because it's 7.5% of the budget. I'm not sure what that is, and then I'm also wondering what other is right under it.
Can you repeat that?
So Jasmine's asking about two line items on the budget to actual on the expenditure section under operations and maintenance. There's a line item for capital outlay and a line item for other. So the capital outlay for fiscal year 2022 was budgeted at $7,500. To date, we spent $34,312, and what that is additional equipment for the food services. So they hit it out of the park last year, way more revenue than expense. So we didn't make our annual general fund transfer. Instead, we allowed them to use a portion of that money to upgrade their equipment, and that's where it's showing up in this line. So it's kind of we're trying to get it in last year's fiscal. It couldn't. There's shipping delays all over, so equipment that's delivered this year is showing up on that line. So it's essentially paid for with the money we'd obligated to food service. That $110,000 on last year's budget under other, we had some grading work done out of the transportation facility to fix cooling water and ice that was a huge hazard for our employees. So it's to fix our workers' comp recommended. And actually, our workers' comp, we had an inspection and they were raving about all the work they've done. And so it's money in my also.
And then on the people transportation, it also has the other of the 3,000.
So that's a budgeted line item. I have to see what exactly is budgeted as other for those $15,000. But they've spent none of that money to date.
Okay. Well, in a actually not sure I had wanted to move with us earlier, but I'm wondering if in our minutes it can reflect when there's going to be follow-up from our team, so that way we don't forget, like an extra reminder of what, the follow-up is going to be for our team and for ourselves.
For the ESSER funds?
Are you talking about the ESSER funds, Jasmine?
No. I'm talking about just the agenda in general. I'm sorry. I'm just saying, we could have our, the person taking the minutes for our agenda to put it in the minutes what will be followed up on in the minutes to reflect, so that way we never forget what, we're going to be receiving from our team on the follow-up.
So I think what will work best is if I present an ESSER review at the next quarterly update, so the quarterly financials plus an ESSER.
Let me see if I can restate what I'm hearing Jasmine request. That it falls on Kelsey usually, because Kelsey takes the minutes. That was an example, but when the board says what's going to happen, and we say, well, we'll get that to you or follow up later, that the minutes reflect the commitment to taking action later. It's usually staff, but I think Jasmine, but also board members. And that actually is a tool that helps remind us and hold us accountable for following them. Am I getting it, Jasmine?
Yes, thank you, Rob.
Maybe it's
That just even the parking lot we just have agenda like updates, follow-up from previous action items.
At the next quarterly update, so that'll probably be early February.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so next, the next business in order is board action on GBJC, a new policy on background checks on first reading of 3. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve new policy GBJC on background checks on first reading of 3.
You wait for me.
I'm like, okay.
All right, is there any discussion? And we'll turn it over to Andy. Well, this is the now, Andy will talk about it, and then after we discuss this, then we'll vote.
This year, we had to complete an audit process for the fingerprinting that we were going to do for in all of our hiring. And one of the findings from that audit was that we don't have the required policies about retention, destruction, storage of fingerprinted records. And so this policy is largely the recommended policy from the CDA as the criminal justice information system government agency in order to meet those requirements tailored to the way that we do business.
So I was a little confused. I mean, kind of like redo all the fingerprints.
We send people to fingerprinting agencies, but the policy is about the information that we receive, review, store, and destroy. So, there's a lot of nuances. You can't even, you can't shred a background check document. You have to contract with an approved vendor to do the destruction itself. So there's a lot of rules. I could go on, but okay.
So it seems pretty straightforward. This is basically we're following the guidance given to us to ensure that we're following the law of storage. Basically keeping these records and then having access to them and then destroying them in the proper way.
And I think one big change from past practice that I'm encouraging my team to do is just make the digital source system. We have so much people who really just go to it. We're doing better to keep those on.
Okay. Yeah. All right. No questions yet. This one was very detailed, so thank you. I think without any further discussion, we are ready to call for the vote.
Madam Chair, I did have a question.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Jasmine.
Thank you. Angie, for those staff members or people who never been aware of students at our local high school who are receiving like a text or interpreting during current conferences, are those students or anybody who does any type of work that is not like directly tied to the district, do they need to do background checks?
We background check.
Do you mind repeating the question, Bobby?
Say again.
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, Jasmine's asking if we are background checking students who are receiving checks for doing school work. And my answer is that the HR department is conducting background checks of classified and certified employees who we're hiring. And so if we're hiring those students, we work. If we're not hiring those students,
I'm sorry, Jasmine. Are we hiring students for work? Yeah, I don't.
Well, I don't know if it's a stipend or what that looks like. I think my understanding is just around the fact that this has been an issue before with the bigger
No, we wouldn't do that, and we don't do that. There's no process by which we conduct like some kind of a criminal background check on a student. The only exception might be, say, if we have a student hired for the grounds crew or something, in which case they become an employee. But what you're describing, I mean, I'm not aware of an interpreting payment to students, but we have a tutorial system where we're giving a scholarship to students, but it's not income, it's a scholarship. And we haven't yet determined how to distribute those funds. It'll likely be through the foundation rather than through the school district because we don't want to be in the business of employing students and like doing things like background checks.
So if a parent were to translate and we're told that they receive compensation for it, would they have to do a background check if they are getting compensated by the student?
Jasmine, I can only speak for the hiring that we do through HR.
Anna, do you want to comment on that?
I've not heard of them happening.
No.
I'm not really sure of a pathway. I'm just curious to learn more.
None of us is aware of this kind of what Anna called a pathway to hiring parents or paying parents for things like this.
We've really stepped up our marketing to parents in hopes of hiring parents, and we're trying to
As employees.
As employees, yeah. An interpreter could be one of those positions.
No, I think Jasmine's saying like we'll pay you as a parent to sort of help out with this duty, but I'm not aware of that actually happening in practice. And so Jasmine, if you're aware of it, I'd love to know. Maybe you can let me or Anna know specifically, so we could inquire more about this.
Okay, I'll follow up. Thank you.
Right. And so I guess that's a great question that would maybe be helpful for us, Andy, is the hiring process, right? We just went over that the steps or the tiers of the hiring process of bringing on a new employee and what that includes. If it's a background check, it sounds like for any of those employee positions, then obviously this is just some process in which we keep the records, not necessarily who gets checked and who doesn't. This is just, if it does happen, this is the process we have to follow.
And that's a pretty easy. I'm happy to put something together, but I can tell you that all employees with the district, certified or classified, undergo a fingerprint-based background check in addition to other, legally, we have to verify employees I-9, so they have to have a legal right to work. They don't have to be a citizen, but they have to be legally able to work. Say that again?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Yes. Get back to my sheet. Please call for the vote. Ramira?
Aye.
Rupert? Aye. Sharon? Aye. Deb? Aye. Lori? Aye. Motion passes. All right. And next is do any members of the board or executive team have reports or comments to share? And we'll have the first IDB rep.
So I'm volunteering, I guess, again, to be the IDB rep for this coming year. Last year we had 2 reps on the committee, and Jen Scherer was on the calendar subcommittee, and I was on the budget subcommittee. And I would like to stay on the budget subcommittee, so we will need somebody, because I think the calendar is up for renewal again, and I don't want to touch that. Yeah, you didn't say me.
So why don't we say if any new or returning board members interested, please reach out to Angie before she reaches out to you.
And the first meeting is next week, Wednesday, 2:45 p.m. virtually.
And then it's WebEx or Meet, Google Meet.
Yes.
Yeah, I can do that. It might be a little bit late.
When do we think we would be?
I was going to leave an update on that. So, well, I don't know if we've received any indication from the Canvas board, but we have until, the Canvas board has until the 24th to certify the results. And then we would have to hold an organizational meeting within 15 days after the results are certified. So we're basically just waiting to hear that, you know, the, results are official, and then we can schedule a meeting in addition. So it could, the latest that it would happen is, could happen is December 9th. But obviously there's that window in between the 24th and 9th where we could hold a meeting at any point.
We're not in time for this IDB.
Not,
But they don't, I don't think you have to be sworn in as a board member to attend a meeting. Yeah, it's, I'm sure, I feel very comfortable that you don't have to be sworn in as a board member.
I do have a question, a clarifying question. As part of IDB, I was never quite sure of my role in this. Am I a member with a vote, or am I just a board member sitting in, listening, so I can inform the board?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I kept the members sort of in limbo.
And you don't have to answer, we can talk offline, but I just want that clarified for this coming year. And maybe that's up to whoever the chair of IDB is.
yeah, I was after IDB.
No, I don't think, honestly, I think it's more about discretion. You know, it's really, it's not, there's no individual who votes. I think that all members of like, you know, teachers and administrators value having the board there, and it also helps us down the road because we don't just bring something completely fake to the board and have the board say, wait a minute, I don't get this. I thought it meant part of the process. I think it's a good question for the group, but I think you should have good discretion in how you use your board. I know when you speak up, people appreciate it.
I mean, one hat that board members always wear is that process excellence. So, you know, you might play other roles in other scenarios, but you're making sure process is followed, people, the right stakeholders are in the room.
That part of our norms are to really leave our agendas at the door and really leave our, you know, positions at the door. So I mean, my belief is you're a full member, but you have to be cognizant of, you know, being different.
Well, I have to say, as a board member, I really appreciate knowing who our representatives are, so that I may not be going to the IBB meetings, but I could tell Jennifer and Maureen, I hear from parents wondering why every other week they felt like they were getting a day off, even though that may not be what really happened, but that's perception, right? And then you're able to say, well, that is because blah, 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 whatever. So then I could go back and say, you know, our board members are part of those discussions. Here's the background on how those decisions were made. Because I'm not in those discussions, but I feel like we have that liaison with your role. Whether or not you're voting or if you're coming to a consensus, we can bring what we're sharing from the community to you to then advocate in that discussion. It's how I feel, I guess.
And I have to give a plug for IDB. It really is a great, it was a great experience. I thought. Don't you? I mean, to really see what's happening between those groups is really a really valuable experience, and I can be caught up.
The other maybe quick update, Ron and I meeting with the Boise Executive Director just to kind of talk more through a partnership and what it will look like going forward. Because I think the last MOU was 5 years ago or something, a lot has changed since then. So let's know what happened.
Maureen, you're really bringing to light too an area in which we need to discuss once we have the new board members sworn in is the subcommittees that we're all a part of, and that rotation, that representation, we're asked as board members to also serve on these various other committees. And in many cases, your responsibility is to relay that information back to Dr. Fiscal. So we'll go over all of that to make sure that those roles are being distributed, perhaps rotated. Those that really love it can keep it, or can ask for somebody to have the opportunity to do that as well. So that will be coming because we have more than IDB and BOCES that we serve on. So.
I would like to give a student count update. So those numbers are due today. So I did a preliminary run through with our student management guru, Nancy Deaver. It looks like compared to budget, we've got about 24 people more than we budgeted. You run that through our averaging calc, and it shakes out to an additional 4.9 funded pupils. It sounds a little unfair, but that averaging is saving us $1.7 million a year. So I'd much rather have that averaging in place than not. But that extra count plus the extra CPE tip looks like we have that's an extra $190,000 for the district. I'm waiting for a bunch of other things to come through, but trending positively compared to definitely the time last year.
And that's something we'll hear more about like in February when you give us the next round.
Yeah. Yeah, so it will all start to be finalized. We'll know what our total program funding is on a more certain basis here in the next month.
Great.
What was that number of students up?
Looks like about 24.
All right. Any more board updates?
Yes. Madam Chair, I actually wanted to bring up a topic. I wanted to talk about CASB really quick to this next month. I know that we had initially said that we were going to wait to see if, Penny and Katie were going to be attending and that we would be deciding. But I did want to ask a question a clarifying question, because I'm a little confused on the reasons why we're not all, everybody who wants to attend is allowed to go. And I wanted to hear back from, I don't know if that's a rough question or an edgy question, but I wanted to put that out there now.
Well, I can give a history. I can't give a question as to why you're allowed or not to allow. We're not allowed to do something. The budget, the board has a budget like every other department, and historically, way predating me, the school district has funded a couple people to participate in CASB as well as our CASB dues, which is really your member, Colorado Association of School Boards, your member organization, as well as other things like meals at board meetings. In 2018-19, when we did a deep dive through the budget, every line item, quite literally in the budget, in interest-based bargaining, the goal was to try to find monies anywhere that could be reallocated into salaries. And part of that decision-making process netted a decision that we take a lot of funds from instructional funds to move into salaries. We would change the ratios allocated to schools in classrooms, and we would take a 10% budget cut for the administrative, for my team, and a 10% cut to the board's budget. And so that doesn't limit the board moving forward. But I guess I'd advise the board to be thoughtful about, reallocating monies to its own expenses, through the budget cycle, and also figuring out, where do we take them. It feels like we're in a better financial position than we were in 18-19. Most of the new monies are not monies that could be allocated to the board, because those are targeted specifically in our commitment to the voters for teacher and staff retention, meaning their salaries. So if you would like us to look at a budget increase for the board for the next school year, we could certainly do that. If you'd like us to look for some one-time money to allocate to board expenditures, I suppose we could do that. I'm not sure we could get back to you on a recommendation. As you said, is it next week or next month? Next month. We might be able to get you a recommendation by then.
My question really stems from the fact that, in 2020, because 2020 is when we
Well,
I know it's $800 for us to attend, but I just, you know, I'm, I'm trying to understand how
we can look at that. I'd like to, let us go look at that. You know, if there's money like carryover money in the board's budget that would fund more people, that would be a good solution. I want to speculate that our interpreting budget went way up because the board requested that we start having interpreting at board meetings. I have a feeling we'll find that more than canceled out any savings for CASB fees, but let us, if you'd like, we can look at that and get back to the board in time to make a decision for CASB.
I can also ballpark, the registration fee is $900, and when you add in mileage, hotels, meals, it can be close to $1,500 or $1,800 even per board member. It's quite expensive.
Well, maybe even a follow-up to Jasmine's question for those board members coming in, I was saying is maybe just along with the financial updates, it's just an update on that expense, that budget, that we can see how that could be utilized. And we haven't even discussed who's going to CASB, so that might be where we start. So does that sound reasonable?